I'd been documenting Chicago's abandoned buildings for 5 years, and my Instagram followers knew precisely what they were getting from my account. Pristine architectural pictures with historical context in the comments, possibly some commentary on urban decline or preservation initiatives. There are no clickbait titles concerning ghostly locations, no dramatic music over shaky camera footage, and certainly no claims about otherworldly experiences. That rubbish was for youngsters hoping to become viral, not real urban explorers. My phone rang with a direct message notification while I was sitting at my kitchen table, editing images from last weekend's trip to an old factory on the west side. The username looked familiar. Greg Martinez. Another Chicago explorer I'd crossed paths with in internet forums. We'd never met in person, but I recognized his work. Solid documentation, good research, no theatrical crap. His reply was short. Mike, and you need to see this happened 2 days ago at Woodlawn Elementary. Below the sentence sat a video file attachment 23 minutes long. And I clicked play, expecting another exploratory walkthrough. Greg's voice came through my laptop speakers, outlining his approach to the construction standards. He had done his homework. On the location, Woodlawn Elementary had closed in 2019 due to budget cuts, leaving a 3-story brick building to slowly deteriorate on the south side. The city had boarded up most access points, but Greg had found a way in through a basement window. The first 15 minutes played out exactly like every other exploration video I'd watched. Empty hallways, overturned desks, graffiti tags, and broken glass crunching under his feet. Greg narrated as he strolled around classrooms, pointing out architectural aspects and giving notes about the building's state. His voice remained calm and measured the way mine sounded in my own recordings. Then everything changed. Greg had been checking out what appeared to be the main hallway on the 2nd floor. When he stopped talking mid-sentence, the camera went still and I could hear his breathing shift slower, more controlled, like he was trying to stay quiet. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened except the ambient sound of wind moving through broken windows. Then I heard it, to a woman's voice, distant but clear, singing something. I couldn't quite make out the melody, wandered up and down without his voice had entirely changed. Tight with nerves I'd never heard from him before, the song got louder. Not closer precisely, but more clear, like someone had turned up the volume. I caught parts of what sounded like a name being repeated, Tommy maybe, or Timmy, intertwined throughout the wordless tune. Greg started backing toward what appeared to be a classroom doorway, his camera work becoming shakier through the lens. I watched him duck inside an old kindergarten class and situate himself behind a cluster of tiny plastic chairs. The music continued in the hallway outside, and now I could hear footfall too. Bare feet on linoleum, unhurried and methodical. Tommy, where are you? The voice was clearer now, gentle and calm, like a mother calling her kid for dinner. Come out, Tommy. Greg's breathing was quick and shallow. The camera shook in his hands as the footsteps passed right outside the classroom door. I saw some red fabric move past the door frame, a dress or skirt flowing as someone walked by. The woman kept calling the name, her voice moving back and forth in the hallway like she was pacing. Sometimes she'd stop, and the building would go quiet except for Greg's panicked breathing. Then she'd start again, always returning to that sing-song call, Tom. Tommy, where did you go? This carried on for almost 5 minutes. Greg stayed completely still behind those little chairs, and I caught myself holding my breath. Even though I was watching from my kitchen table, the woman's voice had something wrong with it, too cheerful, too patient, like someone playing a kid's game that stopped being fun hours ago. Finally, the singing and footsteps moved away. becoming quieter as they headed toward what must have been the far end of the hallway. Greg waited another full minute before he whispered, "I'm getting the rest of the video." Showed his escape route, sneaking back toward the basement window, moving as quietly as possible, constantly looking over his shoulder just before he reached the exit. He turned the camera toward the second floor, and I saw her clearly for the first time. A woman in a red dress standing at the broken window at the end of the hallway, looking down at him. She wasn't calling anymore, just watching Greg climb through the basement window and sprinted across the wetty playground toward the fence line. When he turned back once more, the woman was still at the school's front entrance, still wearing that red dress and watching him depart. The video concluded with Greg out of breath in his car, his face red and sweating on the phone's front-facing camera. "I don't know what that was," he added, "but I'm never going back there." I immediately watched the whole video again, and then a third time. 5 years of urban exploration had taught me how to recognize the fakes. Faulty audio mixing where ghostly voices were added later, fortuitous camera faults shortly before the eerie encounter, buddies playing pranks just outside the camera's vision. Greg's video exhibited none of those signals. His panic was real, the audio was consistent throughout, and the woman appeared too short and from too far away for creative staging. The time stamp in the corner read 2 days ago, 3:47 p.m. Woodlawn Elementary School, just as Greg had said. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my kitchen chair, thinking about what I just saw. For 5 years, I dismissed this kind of information as phony drama. Every urban explorer had stories about strange encounters, and I'd always had logical explanations. Ready, homeless people looking for shelter, other explorers messing around, weird sounds from old building acoustics. But Greg wasn't some rookie trying to get famous online. His other videos showed the same careful approach. I used the same respect for the places and their history. He'd never posted anything supernatural before, never tried to create fake scares for views. I awoke with my laptop still open on the kitchen table, and the screen displayed a Google search for Woodlawn Elementary School, Chicago. The coffee I'd brewed while watching Greg's video had gone cold, with a brown ring staining the bottom of the mug. My neck ached from falling asleep in the chair, but my mind was immediately racing with questions I needed answered. The school's official closing was prominently covered by local news publications. Budget cuts forced the Chicago public school system to merge numerous underperforming primary schools in 2019, leaving Woodlawn idle along with dozens of other facilities across the city. The articles depicted a familiar image, another component of Chicago's educational infrastructure left to degrade, while authorities shifted resources elsewhere. What drew my interest were follow-up reports from neighborhood blogs and community forums. Residents had complained about break-ins and vandalism within months of the closure. Someone had started small fires in numerous classrooms during the winter of 2020, and drug paraphernalia appeared often in the playground area, the standard procedure for any abandoned building in an economically distressed neighborhood. I brought up Google Street View and keyed in the address Greg had indicated in his film. The 3-story brick edifice looked just like the one I'd seen in his footage. Same smashed windows, same graffiti tags on the external walls, same chain link fence with evident cracks cut in the metal. I rotated the image to verify all angles and identified the basement window Greg had utilized for entry on the building's east side. Cross-referencing his footage with the street view photographs corroborated everything. The timestamp, the approach route, even the particular portion of fence he'd climbed through. Gregory hadn't manufactured the spot or staged his entry point. The red dress detail still felt weird. but persons undergoing psychological breaks frequently fixated on certain clothing or things. I'd observed similar scenarios during prior research. A man in an old factory who insisted on wearing a construction helmet everywhere. A woman in a defunct shopping mall who carried 3 different purses simultaneously. The singing and calling could be symptoms of auditory hallucinations, or simply someone talking to themselves. The patient repetitive nature of it actually fit with certain mental health conditions I'd read about online. My rational mind had established a comprehensive framework for everything. Greg had experienced someone was living in Woodlawn Elementary, most likely a woman struggling with psychiatric disorders, and she'd worn a red dress that day for whatever personal reasons motivated her decisions. Greg had strayed into her area and saw conduct that seemed otherworldly only because he lacked context. Something drove me want to examine the place myself, whether professional curiosity or the need to prove my idea accurate, which I'd been documenting abandoned Chicago buildings for 5 years, and this would be just another location with another story of urban decay and human displacement. I decided to visit during afternoon hours when visibility would be optimal and any potential occupants might be away from the building. Safety protocols demanded careful preparation, so I gathered my standard exploration kit. From the closet heavy-duty LED flashlight with enough lumens to illuminate large spaces, backup batteries and waterproof cases to protein bars, and a full water bottle in case the expedition took more than intended. Basic first aid items include bandages, antiseptic wipes, and pain medicine. My phone with a portable battery pack to assure communication capability throughout the stay. I also grabbed my backup camera, a little digital model I used for documentation when my phone wasn't sufficient. If I found anything worth documenting, I wanted reliable equipment before leaving my residence. I sent a text message to David during Woodlawn Elementary on Southside today. I should be back by 6 p.m. Call the police if you don't hear from me. David had grown accustomed to these safety check-ins over the years, though he was still concerned about my hobby. At least this way, someone would know where to look if something went wrong. The drive south took me through neighborhoods I rarely visited, past blocks of houses with boarded windows and empty lots, where buildings had been demolished years ago. Traffic moved slowly through construction zones and around double-parked cars, stretching what should have been a 30-minute trip into 4. Some still had chipped glass in the frames, while others were completely empty. Graffiti covered the walls in layers. Gang tags, random scrolls, and what appeared to be political comments spray-painted over each other until the original brick hue was scarcely visible. The chain-link fence around the property showed signs of frequent trespassing. I counted at least 4 obvious gaps where people had cut through the metal, leaving bent sections that could be easily pulled aside. One opening near the main entrance was large enough to drive a motorcycle through. The city had made a token effort to secure the building, but they'd given up maintaining it long ago. Getting out of my car, I pulled my backpack over my shoulders and checked that the safety protocol seemed more crucial here than in other places. I'd investigated something about how remote the building was, and the obvious signs of regular activity made me more cautious than usual. So I walked along the fence looking for the best way in. Greg had used a basement window on the east side, but I wanted to avoid following his exact route on the building's west side. I found what I needed, a ground floor window where the entire frame had been removed, leaving a rectangular opening that looked like a doorway. Number climbing required no broken glass to deal with. Someone had even placed a concrete block beneath the opening to make entry easier. The smell hit me before I'd fully stepped inside: mold, decay, and something else I couldn't identify, but didn't want to think about too hard. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it across what had once been a first-grade classroom. Tiny desks were overturned and scattered across the floor. Their metal legs twisted at odd angles. Papers littered, an alphabet poster hung from one corner, the rest torn away and crumpled in the corner. I started my meticulous documenting, traveling from room to room along the first-floor hallway, each school showing the same indications of abandonment and neglect. Broken glass crunched under my boots, beer bottles largely, coupled with scattered drug paraphernalia that revealed this location had regular visitors, needle caps, burnt spoons, little plastic bags that had once carried items I didn't want to handle even accidentally. The corridors were worse than the classrooms. Someone kicked holes in several walls, revealing the wooden frame beneath the plaster. Water damage had left dark stains across the ceiling tiles, and in some areas, the tiles had fallen completely, revealing pipes and electrical conduits above. My footsteps sounded different in each section as I moved deeper into the building. In what had been the cafeteria, I discovered traces of little fires, charred rings on the linoleum where people had burned rubbish for warmth, and smoke stains moving up the walls. The burn marks were littered with empty food cans, bottles, and medicine supplies. The commercial kitchen area was stripped bare, and anything valuable had been removed years ago. When I arrived at the library, I expected to find more of the same destruction, but my flashlight revealed that someone had set up a neat living area here, rather than the chaotic mess I'd seen in other abandoned buildings. Blankets were folded nicely in one corner, creating a makeshift bed that looked carefully placed. Empty food containers lined in an exact line along the wall, soup cans, cereal boxes, water bottles, everything clean and ordered. The floor around the sleeping area had been swept clear of debris. Against the far wall, someone had stacked children's books with careful attention to size and order. Picture books on the bottom and chapter books on top, all spine out like a real library display. The books themselves looked worn but clean, as if someone had been reading them regularly. What caught my attention most was the doll propped against the book stack. Blonde hair hung in tangled knots around a plastic face. The arrangement felt intentional, almost as if someone really cared about how things were placed. This wasn't typical homeless living, where people grabbed whatever shelter they could find and left a mess behind. Someone was living here long-term and had made their own little home. Moving closer to look at the books, I noticed they were all elementary-level reading, no adult novels or magazines, just children's stories about talking animals and fairy tale adventures. Some looked like they might have been left behind when the school closed, but others were in too good condition to have sat here for 3 years. Someone had been collecting them. The food containers had a similar story. The labels indicated purchase dates within the last few months, and the diversity suggested regular shopping excursions rather than scavenged soup, crackers, canned fruit, granola bars, all foods that could be eaten without cooking yet gave decent nutrition. Whoever was living here had resources and planning skills. I explored the remainder of the library carefully, looking for more personal stuff that would tell me about the person. In a supply closet that still had a working door, I discovered further traces of someone living here long-term. A little mirror placed on a shelf next to basic amenities. Toothbrush, soap, shampoo bottles that looked recently used, clean towels folded and stacked beside a plastic basin that could be used for washing. Everything pointed toward a single person who'd been here for months, possibly longer. Someone who valued cleanliness and organization, who read children's books and cared for a doll. This didn't match what I expected from the typical homeless people who used abandoned buildings for shelter. Standing in that library surrounded, I began to doubt my rational interpretation of Greg's experience. The woman he had met may not have been a random person with mental health concerns. She might have been someone who'd made this place into her home. Someone who had reasons for being here beyond simply needing shelter. The children's books and the doll suggested something entirely different. Something that made me less comfortable about continuing my exploration alone. I left the library with more questions than answers. But my curiosity was stronger than my growing worry. The main stairwell creaked as I climbed to the second floor. Each step made noise through the empty building, and I started moving more carefully to keep quiet. The damage up here was worse than what I'd seen below. Big sections of hallway ceiling had fallen down, leaving chunks of plaster and twisted metal all over the floor. Water stains covered the walls in dark patterns from multiple roof leaks over the years. The first classroom I entered looked like someone had trashed it. Whoever did this was not concerned about airflow. Smoke streaks ran all the way to the ceiling above the burn site. I proceeded through 3 more classrooms and found similar traces of recent fires, not the careful contained burns I'd seen in the cafeteria below, but thoughtless destruction that could have easily spread throughout the entire building. The scent of burning plastic hung in the air, combined with something toxic that made my eyes water. These fires hadn't happened years ago when the building was first abandoned. The debris patterns and ash suggested much more recent activity. I took out my camera and carefully documented each burn site. The pattern didn't make sense if I assumed one person was living here. The library showed careful organization and long-term planning, but these classrooms showed destructive behavior that didn't match that level of control. Whether multiple people were using this building or little Prince narrow and completely naked, without any trace of shoes or socks. The toe impressions were obvious, and the spacing between steps suggested someone much lower than ordinary adult height. I followed the prints with my flashlight beam tracing their path from the classroom door. Toward the main hallway they moved in a straight line, not the wandering pattern I'd expect from someone exploring randomly. These prints had purpose, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. The prints matched the detail from Greg's video. That had bothered me most, the sound of bare feet on linoleum. That he'd recorded so clearly. Someone had been walking these halls without shoes, and recently. Enough that their tracks were still visible in the dust and debris. I stood up slowly, suddenly aware that the building felt less empty than when I'd entered the organized living space. The recent burns and now fresh footprints showed someone was still using this place, making my presence here feel like I was trespassing in someone's actual home. From somewhere deeper in the building came a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I held my breath and turned my head toward the noise, trying to figure out where it came from. The sound lasted only a few seconds before stopping completely, leaving me wondering if I'd actually heard anything at all. I waited, standing completely still in the doorway of the burned classroom. My own breathing seemed loud in the silence, and I became aware of every small movement I made: the rustling of my jacket, the little creak of floorboards under my feet, and the low buzz of my flashlight. But whatever had caused the scraping sound did not happen again. After a full minute of listening, I told myself it was just the wind pushing debris around somewhere else in the building. Old buildings make constant noise as they settle and move, especially buildings with this much damage. I'd heard similar sounds in dozens of other abandoned places without finding any people. So I moved toward the administrative offices at the far end of the hallway. I followed the bare footprints as they led me deeper into the building. The principal's office door hung open, showing someone had used spray paint to cover every wall with overlapping tags and notes, most of which were unintelligible due of the various layers. Nonetheless, The main office area behind the reception desk showed traces of the same thorough organization. I discovered in the library a supply closet with a working door that had been converted into storage space for personal stuff. Women's clothing was folded and stacked on makeshift shelves created from flipped milk crates, jeans, sweaters, and blouses, all clean and arranged by type and color. The selection suggested someone who could go shopping regularly, not the random mix of donated or scavenged items I'd expect from typical homeless people. On the windowsill facing the playground, toiletries were arranged in a neat line. Shampoo and conditioner bottles were nearly full. A bar of soap in a plastic container, a toothbrush standing up in a coffee mug next to a tube of toothpaste, deodorant, lotion, and even a small bottle of perfume that looked recently bought. Everything suggested someone who followed regular hygiene routines and cared about their appearance. Food wrappers in a little garbage bag gave more evidence of recent occupation. Breakfast bar packages with expiration dates that were still months away. Empty soup cans with no rust. Plastic containers that had housed fresh fruit, based on the product labels still adhered to the edges. This was not survival eating. Someone was keeping a diversified diet, which needed regular shopping visits. I took pictures of each discovery building, a visual record of what looked like a functioning living situation. Hidden within an abandoned building, the contrast between the building's obvious decay and these pockets of careful maintenance created an increasingly complex picture of whoever called this place home. As I adjusted my camera settings to capture the toiletry arrangement more clearly, I heard distinct footsteps from somewhere below me, not the random settling sounds I'd been hearing throughout my exploration, but the unmistakable rhythm of human movement, slow, deliberate steps against linoleum flooring, moving with purpose rather than wandering. I froze, completely listening. The footsteps continued at a steady pace, suggesting someone who wasn't trying to hide but also wasn't hurrying. The sound carried clearly through the building's damaged structure, allowing me to track the movement. As it progressed through the first floor, the steps paused directly below my position. In the administrative office area, complete silence stretched for what felt like several minutes. Though it was probably only 30 seconds, then the footsteps started again. But now they were moving in a different direction, toward the main stairwell I'd used to reach the second floor. Someone was coming upstairs. I quickly thought through my options, as I realized the person below was heading toward the same stairwell that was my main way out. I needed to find another way off this floor, and I needed to do it without making noise that would give away where I was moving. As quietly as possible, I stepped carefully around the scattered office junk and headed toward the opposite end of the hallway. Emergency exit signs were still visible on some walls, though most were cracked or partly covered by graffiti. If this building followed standard school design, there should be a second stairwell near the far end that would let me reach the first floor without running into whoever was climbing the main stairs. As I passed one of the broken windows overlooking the playground, movement below caught my attention. I positioned myself to look down without being seen against the window frame, using the jagged glass pieces as cover. A figure in red fabric was moving through the first floor hallway directly beneath me. The color matched exactly what Greg mentioned in his video. Brilliant red, flowing like a dress or long skirt. From this position, I couldn't make out details about the person wearing it, but the fabric's movement confirmed someone was definitely inside the building and moving like they knew their way around the damaged hallways. The footsteps I'd been hearing suddenly made perfect sense. This was the building's occupant, the person who'd created those careful living spaces and left the fresh footprints in the dust. Greg's supernatural encounter had a completely normal explanation. He'd stumbled into someone's home and seen behavior that seemed strange only because he didn't understand the situation. Knowing what was happening didn't make me feel any safer about being trapped on the second floor. While that person climbed toward where I was, the emergency exit sign at the far end of the hallway was barely readable through layers of spray paint, but I could make out the arrow pointing. I couldn't recognize the tune, which had no pattern, rising and falling like someone singing to themselves while doing everyday tasks. It should have been normal, but something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. I pressed myself against the wall and looked back toward the main stairwell. The red fabric was visible now, moving slowly along the hallway in my direction. Whoever was wearing it seemed in no hurry, stopping occasionally at classroom doorways as if checking on spaces. I noticed a solid wall coated in the same layered graffiti as the rest of the building at some point during renovations or budget cuts. The school system had blocked this stairwell permanently. My other escape route did not exist. The principal's office door was slightly open just a few steps away, and I had no other options. The approaching figure was blocking the main stairwell. The emergency exit was sealed, and the windows on this floor were too high above ground level for a safe jump. I needed to hide until the person passed by, then make my way back to the main stairs. When the coast was clear, I slipped through the narrow opening into the principal's office, pulling the door almost closed behind me while leaving enough gap to watch the hallway. The space was larger than the classrooms, with this was organic rot, the distinct stench of decomposing meat that appeared to cover the inside of my nostrils. With each inhale, I pulled my shirt collar up over my nose and mouth, trying to filter the air enough to function. The principal's desk was in the center of the room, its surface cleared save for a solitary cardboard box positioned directly in the middle. The box was open, its flaps folded back to reveal the contents inside. My flashlight beam discovered the box before my brain could understand what I was seeing. Long dark hair spilled over the cardboard edges, framing a woman's face that stared upward with glassy, unfocused eyes. The skin was pale gray with dark veins visible beneath the surface, and the neck ended in a ragged, torn edge where it had been separated from the body. I stumbled backward, my rational mind struggling to accept what my eyes were showing me. This wasn't an abandoned building decay or vagrant occupation. It was a severed human head, purposely put, and lately enough that the smell of decomposition permeated the entire room. The woman's features were familiar in a way that made my chest constrict. The length and color of the hair, even the blank expression, matched what I'd seen in Greg's video. This was the woman in the red dress, the figure who had watched him from the school's broken windows. But if this woman was dead, decapitated, and displayed like some twisted trophy, who had Greg actually encountered? Who was wearing the red dress and making that noise in the hallway outside this office right now? My foot caught the leg of an overturned chair as I tried to back, painted shut and partially boarded but potentially breakable. If I could find something heavy enough to smash through, I grabbed a metal stapler from the floor and rushed to the nearest window the paint had created, a seal so thick that the window frame wouldn't budge despite my pulling with both hands. I raised the stapler to strike the glass, but the footsteps had reached the doorway. The door swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. The figure standing in the entrance was tall and skinny, with stringy hair hanging around a face that twisted into an expression of pure joy at finding me cornered in the office. He wore the same red dress I'd seen in Greg's video, the fabric flowing around his bony body like a costume that belonged on someone else entirely. But what he held in his hands made my legs go weak. Another chopped head dangled by its hair from his fingers, fresh blood still trickling from the torn neck wound into his bare feet. The face was unfamiliar, but the dread frozen in the lifeless features suggested this person had seen exactly what was coming in their last moments. The man's smile widened impossibly, showing teeth that were stained dark with substances I didn't want to identify. When he spoke, his voice was high-pitched and sing-song like a child announcing a game. Tommy's been such a bad boy hiding from Mama. I grabbed the nearest filing cabinet and threw it at him with all my strength. The metal crashed into his legs, making him stumble backward just enough for me to squeeze past his reaching arms and run into the hallway. His voice exploded. "Tommy, come back. Mama needs to talk to Tommy." The words rattled about the broken walls as I sprinted toward the main stairwell, my flashlight beam leaping wildly across the debris-covered floor. I struck the steps and took them 3 at a time. My boots impacted the concrete steps with such force that pain raced up through my knees above me. I could hear bare feet slapping against linoleum throughout the stairwell. He was following, moving faster than should be possible for someone wearing a dress and carrying a severed head. The first-floor hallway stretched ahead of me, and I ran harder than I had since high school track, my backpack hitting my spine with each step behind me. His voice kept calling, the words becoming more twisted and frantic as I got further away. I could see the broken window where I had entered, that rectangular opening that had seemed so handy an hour ago. Now it was the only thing between me and whatever that thing upstairs actually was. I dove through the opening without slowing down, feeling sharp glass edges tear through my jacket sleeves and cut into my hands as I scraped against the frame. Blood immediately covered my palm. My feet hit the overgrown playground and I stumbled through tall weeds and scattered playground equipment toward the fence line, where my car waited on the street. Rusty swing sets and a broken slide got in my way, forcing me to dodge around them while trying to stay fast. My hands shook so badly that I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the car door. Blood from the glass cuts made everything slippery, and I wiped my palms on my jeans before finally getting the key into the lock. The engine started on the first try, and I'd never been more thankful for reliable car maintenance. As I put the car in drive, movement caught my attention in the rearview mirror. The figure in the red dress stood in the school's main entrance, exactly where Greg had seen the woman watching him leave. But this wasn't the same careful watching Greg had described. This thing was screaming words I couldn't understand, waving the severed head above his head like some kind of trophy, while his voice carried across the empty playground. I pressed the gas and sped down the residential street, taking turns without any plan except getting away from that building. In my rearview mirror, the figure got smaller until the school itself disappeared behind a row of houses. Only then did I let myself check my hands, finding multiple shallow cuts across both palms that would need cleaning, but weren't deep enough to need stitches. The journey home happened in a mental fog. As I followed familiar routes without thinking, my brain continued attempting to absorb what I'd seen, going through explanations that made less sense each time. A homeless encampment, mental illness, drug-induced psychosis, someone pulling an elaborate hoax with movie-quality special effects. But the smell of rot in that office and the filing cabinet I'd hurled were real. The glass cuts on my hands were definitely real, and somewhere beneath all my logical explanations, a deeper part of my brain knew that I'd run into something that didn't fit into any category I'd previously believed possible. Back at my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table, with my laptop open and my phone in my bloody hands. David was working till the evening, so I had hours to figure out how to explain this issue to someone in charge without sounding utterly nuts. I called the Chicago Police Department's non-emergency number and waited through for minutes of hold music before reaching a desk officer who seemed bored by whatever call he'd handled before mine. "I need to report a suspected crime scene at Woodlawn Elementary School on the South Side," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and matter of fact. The officer asked for my name. and contact information, then wanted details about what I discovered. I told him about the severed head in the principal's office, describing the condition and location as accurately as possible. When he asked how I'd gotten into the building, I explained that I'd noticed broken windows while driving past and had looked inside out of concern. I didn't mention Greg's video, my urban exploration. The officer took my statement and said detectives would follow up if they needed more information. He thanked me for calling and finished with standard advice about staying away from the location while they processed the scene. After hanging up, I looked at my phone for a few minutes before opening my Instagram account. 5 years of photos, thousands of followers, and hundreds of images of every big abandoned structure I'd examined in Chicago. My profile bio described me as a Chicago urban explorer and architectural photographer with links to my other social media accounts. I deleted the entire account without downloading any of the content. Next, I pulled up the online marketplace where I'd bought most of my exploration equipment over the years. My LED flashlights, backup batteries, first aid supplies, cameras, safety gear, and even my solid exploration backpack. Everything went up for sale at prices low enough to ensure quick buyers. The process took 2 hours, and by evening, I'd sold nearly $1.00 worth of equipment to people who messaged me with pickup arrangements for the following week. David came home while I was boxing up the gear for buyers, and he stopped in the doorway of my bedroom looking confused. "What happened to your hands?" he asked, noticing the bandages I'd applied to the glass cuts accident while working on something. I said, sealing another box with packing tape. "I'm getting out of the exploration thing." He didn't push for details, probably relieved that I was giving up a hobby that had always worried him. Instead, he helped me carry boxes to the living room and asked if I wanted to order pizza for dinner that night. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that happened at Woodlawn Elementary. The organized living spaces, the careful arrangements of personal belongings, the severed head in the cardboard box, and lastly the man in the red dress who had chased me through the building while cradling another head like a child's toy for 5 years. I approached urban exploration as a study project. I shot images of rundown buildings to highlight how economic changes affected communities. I used to roll my eyes at those who claimed to see ghosts or monsters, thinking they just wanted attention and YouTube views. But I was wrong about what might be hidden in abandoned areas. Some buildings weren't just empty. Things lived there that normal people wouldn't look at. The excitement that kept me exploring for 5 years was completely gone. Now that I finally understood that some abandoned places had dangers way worse than falling through floors or getting caught by security.